Okay, so we did talk last time about things that have to do with history. I thought we had a decent class last week, talking about some people, and we talked about kind of what we had called corroborating evidence, right, or corroborating sources that we can look at. What did we say? What did we say that was? What is that, though? Corroborating sources or evidence? Okay, that would be part of those sources or evidence, yeah. Basically, anything that confirms, anything that bolsters, anything that supports, strengthens the reliability of something, essentially just making it more trustworthy, okay? You're just trying to compile some things around whatever you have. But that's what it is. But we looked at some of those sources that do help support and do help strengthen the reliability of the Bible. There were three groups really that we talked about that had lived and wrote around the time of the apostles, around the time of the first century church. What groups did we talk about? What were those groups? Yep. Yep, and really we only talked about two of them, honestly. We didn't get to the last one. Yeah, and we'll kind of get to those tonight. But yeah, so you've got apostolic fathers, you've got early church fathers, and then you've got what's also known as guys that were apologists, okay? People that were kind of also during that time defending Christianity. What was significant about the apostolic fathers? Yeah, they maybe even knew the apostles. They were very close to the apostles, right? One of them in particular may have even been mentioned by Paul, right? In Philippians, that would be the Clement of Rome. That's not 100%, but it's pretty likely that it was. Okay, he may have been a companion of Paul's, but he wrote around 95. Well, John didn't even die until around 100. It's believed, like in at Ephesus. So you've got some overlap there. So a lot of those early guys after the apostles maybe even knew John. You had Ignatius of Antioch, you had Polycarp of Smyrna, Papias of Hierapolis. You started then getting into the early church fathers with Irenaeus and Clement of Alexandria, Tertullian or Origen, Hippolytus, Cyprian. All of those men who were men who wrote and were the closest in time to the New Testament and the writers of the New Testament. And they give us an insightful window into what was going on with the church really during the first, second, and third century there. Very, very, very early stages of the church. Okay, and they're really, really cool to look at. So I do want to go over some of the things that they all wrote about. But we didn't, as I said, we didn't actually get to some of the men that were in that third group last week. So I want to talk about them before we get into some of the other stuff as far as their writings. But we had talked about some of the fathers and the early church fathers. But you also have these guys. You have the apologists. Okay, and the apologists were writing around the same time as the others, maybe a little bit later, but still fairly close. Okay. Now, kind of some background to these men that wrote. Okay, when you get to the end of Emperor Nero's persecution, y'all heard of Emperor Nero? Have you heard of him? Okay, he was around the mid-60s, late 60s. Anyway, when you get to around the end of Nero's persecution, or the end of Nero's persecution, which ended about 68, and that persecution really was tied to the great fire that had happened at Rome, okay, and that was around 64. But there was a fire that had happened in the city. It ended up burning through some of the districts in the city of Rome. Well, the Christians actually ended up kind of getting the blame for all of that. The Christians set fire to the city. They did it. Okay? So they were getting blamed for starting the fire. Nobody, I don't think, really ever figured out who it was. But some actually thought that Nero somehow had it started and put it on the Christians because they were an easy target to blame at the time, being that they were already viewed as an easy target. They were already viewed as this kind of weird antisocial, anti-Rome kind of suspicious group who didn't really agree with the emperor at all in Rome. And oh, by the way, they're a bunch of cannibals because they eat Jesus' blood or his body, and they drink his blood. Right? They believe that. I mean, they didn't quite know about these Christians and stuff. What are they doing? What is this group? Right? Are they cannibals? Yeah, it's some weird stuff going on. So, some think that maybe Nero, may have done it, but pinned it on them. And so, persecution under Nero went on for about 4 years until he died in 68. Now, there was some more speculation, like actually he ended up building like his, what was it called, the Golden House or whatever, there in Rome after the fire. So it was kind of like there was a fire, and then you build this giant house where the fire was. Everybody kind of had their speculations on old Emperor Nero about if he actually, set them up or something. But anyway, but he died in 68. But with that event happening, and what people already thought about the Christians, they started to defend themselves, really, and not necessarily in a physical way, but they started defending themselves and defending their way of living, and the way that they lived and what they were following. And so they started trying then to write these things down and explain things like the origin of Christianity and what they followed and the doctrine. They started writing about the doctrine and what that was, and the worship and the lifestyle and so forth. They all started writing these things down. People are kind of confused. What are you about? Who are you people, right? So now, and there's persecution going on, so they're trying to kind of defend in that way. And so those writings really came to be known as apologies, okay, which is basically just defenses given to defend the beliefs and practices of Christianity. Okay, so what they wrote, that's kind of what they now came to be known as. But the writers of those apologies were known as apologists. Make sense? Okay, so that's what they come to be known as, apologists. Those who wrote in defense of Christianity. All right? And they wrote about all kinds of things to try and defend the religion. It's no different today, really. I mean, people still write books in defense of Christianity all the time. The church even has an entire organization within the Brotherhood, an entire company that focuses on nothing but apologetics. That'd be the Apologetics Press, right? We're all familiar with them. We support them, okay? So we even have that. Those who write and those who do that, we would call apologists still. Okay, it's the same term. We would call them those people. But there was a really strong need for it, and a strong need for people to really start laying out what all of this was about. All right? Really start putting it down, writing it down, what everything was about. They're getting persecuted for it a lot. And for a lot of different things. So people needed to start clearing the air on what this stuff was and what all this Christianity stuff was about. All right? We need to set the record straight. We're not a bunch of cannibals. Okay? They needed to get that clear. So the thinking was also, if we can maybe teach and convince through the writings and stuff, and teach like these pagan Roman people that Christianity is actually a good thing and could be a good thing even for the empire because of the influences that it could have on it, right? Everything could start to get better, maybe, right? Same thing for today. We want a Christian community. We want everything to be a lot better if it was, right? The world would be a whole lot better if we were all just Christians in the real sense and all did it right? So that's also kind of the thinking too. But anyway, that's really what started happening, this big push to defend and help people understand everything about what this was. Apologies, all right? defending. Well, now it's time to defend. All right. So that's kind of this era. All right, but you had some more prominent people who were in this time as well, really part of this movement. All right, so let's look at some of the really more prominent ones. There are some overlays. You might have an early church father who is also an apologist. I think Clement of Alexandria is one of those guys. Maybe Irenaeus is one of those guys. Some overlap there. But anyway, okay, the first dude, we've probably heard of this guy before. Justin Martyr, okay? Well, Justin Martyr, really his life was 103, 165, so that's really, really close to John. So this guy becomes a Christian around 133, actually in an interesting meeting at Ephesus with an older Christian man, and he's converted, okay? So that's how Martyr was converted, Justin was. And then, so from there, he starts teaching. He starts teaching it to others. He does lots of extensive writing. Okay? Eusebius, which is another name in this, around the 4th century era. Okay? He actually mentions 8 different works from Justin Martyr, but I think only 2 or 3 of them actually have survived. Okay? But we do get a lot from that. He wrote what's known as First and Second Apology. Also, you have another one, Dialogue with Trypho, a Jew. Okay, so that was a couple of his works. Martyr also, really in his writings, he urges the emperor to investigate Christianity. Check this stuff out. You need to look at us. You need to look. You need to really dive into this and check it out and the truth about Christians. And then 2, which is something we may look at later, but he also gives insights into the worship of the Christians, into the worship of the church and stuff like that, on into the 2nd century. So that's could be very helpful. That's a window, right, that we could look into and see something that was going on, things that were going on in the 2nd century. That's interesting. That's Justin Martyr. All right. Apologist number 2, Quadratus. He writes from about 125 to 129. Really, he's one of the first to write in defense of Christianity. He's got a work also, Apology of Quadratus. He addresses it to the Emperor Hadrian. Okay, we don't really have preserved his apology. It hasn't exactly survived, but Eusebius, the other historian, he does write about some of the things that Quadratus wrote in his work. Eusebius is going to be around 326. All right, for his stuff. I have a copy of his stuff actually in my office if anyone wants to borrow that. All right, so that's Quadratus. He's another prominent apologist. And now we have Irenaeus. Now Irenaeus he's kind of got a lot that he did, 130 to 200. Again, I know we had already mentioned him last week because he is regarded as an early church father, but he's also regarded as an apologist at the same time. So we do have a few more things about him. So basically, he had heard the preaching from Polycarp, and I think that was down in Asia Minor, when he was a child, when he was a youth, and he became his disciple, Polycarp's disciple. So Irenaeus was a very learned man, quoted from nearly every Christian writer before him, has a lot of scripture that he quotes in his writings. He wrote 5 books which are called Against Heresies, so book 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And also in his writings, you're going to see a lot of descriptions of the Gnosticism, and he talks about that teaching, that heresy really, of Gnosticism. Appeals to the Bible. I like how he does it. He appeals to the Bible to prove that the Gnostic theory is false. So he kind of hits it head on with that. He shows the 4 Gospels are the only inspired Gospels. And also he was a defender of the inspiration of Scripture. Also, he defended the virgin birth of Christ, and he proved that the right doctrine had been preserved from the apostles. And I think he goes, he tries to kind of get through this succession of bishops from the apostles down to his time. Anyway, that's a little extra. Okay.
Reading this right, it says, shows that the four Gospels are the only inspired Gospels. Is that only inspired Scripture or just?
Well, there were, I think, some other Gospels that were coming out at the time. I think what he wrote was, what was that called? Decatorum or something like that. Basically what that meant was the harmony of the four Gospels is something that he wrote. Basically just trying to prove that the four Gospels that they had are the inspired Gospels. There are no other Gospels that need to be included in that. So yeah. But no, he's not advocating that that's the only inspired books. No. Nope. So anyway, okay, that's Irenaeus. Some stuff about him. You've got Tatian. He's another guy, prominent apologist. 125, 200. This is neat. He actually converted Justin Martyr before the middle of the 2nd century. So these guys all they knew each other. Okay, they're all around about the same time. But he converts Martyr. And now wait a minute. Did I just catch something here? Became a Christian around 133 after meeting another Christian at Ephesus. I wonder if that was Tatian. If Martyr became a Christian after the guy he met at Ephesus, I wonder if that was Tatian that he met. Sorry, I just had an epiphany. I don't know if that's the same guy or not, but anyway, I'm going to have to look that up. Okay, but anyway, converted Justin Martyr. He wrote Address of Tatian to the Greeks. So he exposes, oh no, it was Tatian that wrote that on the Diatessaron, the harmony of the four Gospels. I told you wrong, Jenny Lou, sorry. Anyway, but he writes the Address of Tatian to the Greeks. He exposes heathenism. He really exposes the, I guess, falsity of what the Greeks believed and the Greek gods and so forth. That's kind of what he exposes. Although, unfortunately, he falls into Gnosticism later on. So, started off good, but kind of fell away into some heretical beliefs. He did teach Clement of Alexandria, but Clement later even called him a heretic for falling off into that teaching. You have another one, Aristides. 138, 147, the Apology of Aristides, the first complete document that defends Christianity. Talks about the practices of the church in the middle of the 2nd century. So he's another interesting one to look at for some of that. Aristides. Melito. Melito had quite a lot that he wrote, 18 to 20 different works that he does and has. 2 of those at least are on the Lord's Day, on baptism. You'll find a lot of things that they wrote about that. Actually, 3 pretty prominent things: baptism, the Lord's Supper, and the resurrection, really, that they talked about a lot. He defended that Christianity was the final revelation from God to man, prophesied about from the Old Testament. Okay. Also, his work strongly influenced other apologists after him. So he was a pretty influential guy with his work. Athenagoras of Athens. Check that out. Converted from a personal reading of Scripture. Who'd have thought? You could still be converted just from reading Scripture. He seemed to be a guy that was trained in Greek philosophy. He too was a very learned guy. He's got a couple works, Supplication for the Christians, which refuted charges against Christians. But he also showed in that the pagan gods are human inventions, since they have the same weaknesses as men. It was one of his works. And then the other one that he had was On the Resurrection of the Dead, in which he puts forth reasons for believing in the resurrection, the reality of it, the necessity of it. That's where he was going.
Were these people defending that God existed, or
Yep.
the New Testament
That was of it. That was a part of it. Yeah, the existence of God.
and the New Testament?
And this stuff, yeah. All of it, really. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, and then you've got this guy, Theophilus. Not the same Theophilus that Luke wrote to. This is much later. Okay. yeah, he would be very old. But he's around 190. Sixth bishop of Antioch. He too became a Christian through private study.
Bishop what?
Of Antioch.
Let's get bishop.
Oh, yeah. So the way that I was understanding it, when you kind of started to have congregations that were being set up, I don't know. It seemed to me that there seemed to be a departure, I guess, from the model that we read about as to the organization of the church, like elders and all of that. But it seemed like you had just some prominent leaders that started to emerge. And then they would, I guess, I don't exactly know how it happened, but they would then be, I guess, set up to be, you're the leader now of Antioch. Just as a leader. It doesn't mean they were an elder. I know that word is also used in same sense sometimes. I was kind of confused on it myself because I was like, that. What do you mean bishop? Bishop? What bishop of what? What bishop? But there were. I don't know. I guess somebody that was just stepping up, and I mean, you might know some more on that, but I don't know. I'd need to do a little bit more research on the bishop part of that. But
I have a question.
okay.
It says, was the sixth bishop of Antioch, was he the sixth one of a group, or was he the one bishop here, one bishop here, one bishop here?
That's what I'm not sure of, honestly. I don't know.
He was by himself.
It's the way it seems. Yes. And you had other bishops of. There were other towns and cities that some of these men were bishops of. Irenaeus. I don't know if it was Irenaeus or it may have been Irenaeus. He was a bishop in Gaul, I think it was. Anyway, again, I don't exactly remember how exactly that all played out.
We're not sure if it's lost in translation. There might have been only one church there. He was a bishop, leader, whatever you want to call it there. Or if it was actually over a town like they set up now under the Catholic hierarchy, the bishop of this area, that city, that.
I think it started morphing into that later.
I think you're correct in that there was a divergence and they were seen as a bishop, the bishop of the church there, and the leader of the church referred to as the bishop.
Right. And it didn't mean that they didn't have elders. Yeah, but
They might have had elders, but
yeah.
yeah.
I'll look more into that because that was kind of confusing to me, and I didn't have time to really look all into that. But you have them there, and they're all in history, like bishop of this and bishop of that. Like,
Always been a question in my head.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah,
we don't have bishops in the
Yeah.
over cities. We have more
Right.
local churches.
right. But anyway, he, sixth one of Antioch, but he too became a Christian through his own private study. He writes to a pagan official named Autolycus. But in that work, there are three defenses, kind of broken up into three parts. One of those was the existence of God, the absurdities of pagan gods and idolatry, the fact of the resurrection, he also wrote on. In the second part, he starts to contrast the defense Greeks made for their gods and religion with what is set forth in the Old Testament. And then in the third part of his work, he talks about how Christianity is a true development of God's plan, with Judaism being the first phase. and that really Christianity is superior to paganism and that pagans are wrong for attacking Christians. So that's what he started talking about. And also, he had said that the Old Testament and the New Testament were both inspired by one Spirit of God. And we would agree with that. So, those are the main apologists, okay? I know it's kind of boring looking at those, but it is interesting to some degree. Those are the main ones that were working during that time. Some of them are connected. Some learned from the other, and they were doing some really important work. Work that we still look back on today for some very insightful information. We're looking at it right now. Now, I thought of this too when I was putting this together. You look at what all of these guys were writing about and what they were doing and what they did and what they were writing. But with some of them, you really see where they were going to refute some of the things that they were handling and dealing with. You kind of see what they kept appealing to defend Christianity. You see them handling false teachings. Irenaeus took Gnosticism head on, trying to prove that the theory was false using Scripture. He defended the inspiration of the Bible and its authority. He defended the truth that came down from the apostles. Tatian, at first, was bringing down the thoughts of the Greeks, challenging their ideas, challenging their philosophies. It's not right. They're challenging those things, right? They challenged those that believed in false gods and how wrong that was and how Christianity actually does hold up. Okay? You see them appealing to the Old Testament and appealing to Bible prophecy about what was to come. Okay? They talked about the resurrection, the existence of God, and they tried to get people to see that Christianity is a legitimate religion and Jesus Christ ought to be believed in and followed. That's what they were fighting and writing about. And really what you see are, I called it the apologetics of the apologists and what they were getting into. And I just think it's interesting that none of that has really changed. We do the same things today. We try and go to the same things today for the most part to try and convince people that God exists and Jesus was real and Christianity is the truth. We do the same thing. We try to get people to follow Jesus, follow His teachings that were handed down from the apostles, from Jesus and to the apostles and so forth. We still use some of the same methods today to try and get people to believe that Christianity is good, Christianity is right, Christianity is better, and it makes sense. It all does. It all checks out.
A lot of this has, a lot of what they're trying to prove, there is hard evidence on some of it, but a lot of it is faith-based. So how do you prove that? I mean, like the virgin birth. I mean, there's a lot of faith that comes. You have to believe it.
Yeah, I mean, there's the element of that too, but everything else that...
So how can these writers prove something that...
Well, they can prove it because of how close they are to the apostles. Remember, they knew some of them.
But if you don't have like evidence, hey, this happened, because a lot of our belief is
Yeah.
faith-based.
Yeah.
How do you prove something that's faith-based?
Yeah. I mean, we can say that with a lot of things.
The evidence that exists to the point of this, and then the natural conclusion brings the other into place.
Yeah.
If God exists, if He brings His Son into the world, the virgin birth is not hard to believe.
Right. Yeah. But, yeah. I mean, they're that, yeah, I mean, all of that. But they're that close to the apostles. I mean, what did I read?
That was your first lesson.
I think it was.
3,000, 4,000.
Yeah. The manuscripts and all of that.
From early on.
I think I read today that I'll include it in when we start getting into the actual quotes from them. but I think it was Quadratus. Again, Eusebius writes what Quadratus wrote about. But I think one of the things that Quadratus mentioned, and I'm paraphrasing this, but some of the people that were raised from the dead when Jesus died, you remember that? And they started walking around and stuff. I think Quadratus mentions, correct me if I'm wrong, that some of those people even lived up until, well, him. So that's a pretty good, if you could get a hold of some of those people, that's a pretty good, evidence for you right there for a lot of things. But anyway, that's what they're trying to do. Did they win over everybody with their stuff? No. No, they didn't. Some of them even got drug off into heresies that they shouldn't have ever got into, but it happened. Even some of their own friends were like, "You don't need to be getting into that stuff. You're a heretic now." They called them out, So they didn't get everybody. Some of them fell into it themselves, but I can appreciate seeing the truth, being converted, and then turning around to defend it and try to convince other people to get on board with Christianity and the truth. That's what we do. I'm converted. You're converted. We're converted. Now what do? Let's go get some more. Right? Defend it. Jump in the fight. Jump in the battle. Let's go. Let's get more people. That's what they're doing. They're trying to defend everything about it. They believed in this stuff. Some of them died for this stuff. Some of them were martyrs. Right? So, boy, pretty hard to die for a lie. Right? And that's a lot of what people say about these guys, right? Why? Why would they go to their death believing in a lie? It's a lot of people that died for a lie, if that's true. So, anyway, but I think some of the examples that we see from them are powerful, and I think sometimes, just think, do I have that same conviction? Do we have this same conviction about what they had and like they had? I mean, are we that convinced of it all to try and get other people on board about it? I mean, that you got to answer that for yourself. That's an internal thing. Am I that convinced to try and get other people on board? Anyway, okay, next time we'll actually start trying to get into what they had actually said. Yeah.